the body is a unit, though it is made up of many parts. And though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. For we are all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Now the body is not made up of one part, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the hand can't say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts of the body that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts of the body that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has combined the members of the body and has given great honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And in the church, God has appointed first of all apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then workers of miracles, those having gifts of healing, those able to help others, those with gifts of administration, and those speaking in different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But eagerly desire the greater gifts. Now, if you're ever concerned about your spiritual gifts and what your spiritual gifts are, you can get online and you can take a spiritual gift assessment. And it will ask you a bunch of questions, and you answer the questions, and then it will tabulate the results, and it will give you the results and say, here are your spiritual gifts. Now, I doubt the effectiveness of such tools, unfortunately. Several years ago, before they were online, you had to go to the Christian bookstore and buy these booklets which had the tests in them. But I was at a church that decided to do this. And everybody's filled out their forms, and we've come together to talk about the gifts and see how we're going to use everybody's gifts in the church. And one lady privately comes into the church and says, I have all of the spiritual gifts except for one. And I go, which gift is it you don't have? And she stops and she looks through her book and goes, humility. Because those assessments don't tell you your gifts. They tell you the gifts that you think you have, or the gifts that you want to have. And it's not that hard to figure out from the questions what gifts the questions are pointing to. So I kind of feel that can be thrown away as a tool. What is much better for discovering your spiritual gifts is to take one of those assessments and don't fill it out yourself. Give it to someone else within the church that you trust. and say, answer this the way you think I would answer it if I was being honest. Which of these questions do you think apply to me? Because we only know our spiritual gifts when they're used. And the best judge of what gifts we have are those we use our gifts to help. I filled out these assessments when I was in high school. And none of them ever said I had the gift of preaching. That's because I filled them out and I wanted nothing to do with being a preacher. So I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I was answering all the questions that led to having the gifts of preaching as if I didn't have any. Then the assessment comes back, well, you're not called to be a preacher, don't worry. Obviously, it didn't work out for me that way. Why does God give us spiritual gifts? Well, He gives us spiritual gifts to build up the church. All the gifts Paul mentions here are for the church. This is not about going out and preaching the gospel to unsaved people. This is about building up the faith of the people who are already part of the community of believers. So we know that. This is why God gives the gifts. We also know that God gives everyone gifts. So you can't fill out the assessment and come back and have it say, well, I don't have any spiritual gifts, so you can't ask me to do anything. Wouldn't that be a nice excuse? Well, God didn't give me the gift to do that, so I don't have to. Now that may be true, but there's something God gave you gifts for. And God gives different gifts to different people. We don't all have the same gifts. There's a reason we don't have all of the same gifts. Just like there's a reason that, in spite of what that lady at church told me, God had not given her every gift except humility. And everybody in that church would have liked to have told her that God did not give her every gift except humility. They could have told her that. God gives us different gifts so that we need each other. He wants us to need one another. He wants us to depend on each other. And here's the problem, as I talked with the children about. We forget that God created us to need each other. Back in Genesis, when God created the earth and He made Adam, and then He sticks Adam in the garden and He says, you get dominion over all the animals. And God said everything is good. And in the very next verse, God looks down on the earth and says, it is not good. What's not good? It is not good that man is alone. Again, this is before the tree of knowledge, before they eat of the tree of knowledge. This is before sin enters the world. And God looks down at His perfect creation and says, something is not good. Man is alone. Adam They were not his equals. Adam had God. But God is not Adam's equal, or I should probably say Adam is not God's equal. And so God made Eve from Adam, equal to Adam, so that Adam was not alone. The Greek philosopher Aristotle put it this way. He said, man is by nature a political animal. Man belongs in communities. We don't do well on our own. And the problem we have, though, is we try to do everything on our own. We try to do things on our own that were meant to be done in a community, that were meant to be done by a community. When I worked at Walmart, when we got the pallets of furniture, anything that was over 75 pounds or over 4 foot long had a little picture on it that showed 2 people working together to lift the box. And if you lifted that box on your own and you threw your back out, they were not paying you workers' comp. Because you did something you knew not to do and you were stupid to do it. And they'll pay for injuries, but they won't want to pay for stupidity. At least once a year, we had somebody injure their back or trip and fall and injure something else because they were trying to carry an item that needed to be carried by at least 2 people. We try to do things on our own that are not meant to be done by ourselves. And this doesn't just go towards lifting boxes. As a church, and I have to say personally, as a pastor, often I try to do on my own things that are meant to be done by the community. And I get hurt by it. I graduated from seminary 28 years ago. Half of my graduating class, actually more than half of my graduating class, has left the ministry since they started, since they graduated. They burned out. They got worn out by it. Sometimes it was the church's expectations of, well, that's the pastor's job to do, not ours. And sometimes it was the pastor's expectations that I've got to do all of this. Some churches seem to think that their pastor must have every gift. Well, that's unreasonable. Some pastors seem to think they must have every gift. That's egotistical. We as pastors, we don't want to, when the church asks us to do something, we don't want to stand before the board and go, well, that's not my job description. You ever had somebody tell you that when you asked them to do something? That's not my job description, or that's above my pay grade. I used to do this when I was working at Walmart. I'd be stocking the shelves and somebody couldn't find, a customer couldn't find something. They go, usually joking, well, that must be his fault. And I'd look right at him and say, I don't have enough authority for anything to be my fault. But we wear ourselves out trying to do it on our own. Now maybe it's not the entire job, church members do the same as church pastors. We all at times do things for the church that we don't necessarily like to do, but somebody's got to do it. And if we find ourselves constantly doing what needs to be done because somebody's got to do it, and then after a while we think, I have to do it because nobody else can do it as well as I can. The hardest thing about saying no is not saying no. It's watching somebody else try to do something you can do and fail at it. And thinking to yourself, I could do better. Oh, they need my help. I'll just take over for them. And they may be very happy that you do. But we're going back to doing it ourselves instead of doing it together. When Elijah complained to God that he had to do it all himself, God sent Elisha. Now, God did not send Elisha and Elisha immediately took over for Elijah. God sent Elisha, and Elisha was Elijah's disciple, his follower, his student for years before he took over. Part of doing it in community is training up those who will follow us in our ministry. Whether you're a pastor being a mentor to a younger pastor, whether you're the clerk or the moderator teaching someone else, so that at some point when you have to lay down your position, you have confidence there's somebody ready to carry on. Or if you're just doing a thankless job at the church, to find someone and say, hey, could you please help me with this? Train them up. That's how we avoid burnout in the church. But if, no matter what the job we have is, we continue to act and think as if it is our burden alone, we will exhaust ourselves without accomplishing our task. Yes, I'm called to the ministry, but so are each of you. Many of you know it, and you do good work in the church. But remember, that work is not yours alone. Especially remember this when you get tired of the work, when you get worn out.